Yeah, Caribe, Mark, it was really an impactful moment in the courtroom when that verdict came in. We were waiting all day and we expected we might get it this afternoon. And by the time we got in there and the jury was let in, it all happened really quickly. And I've described this as almost like a big holding of breath until that verdict was read, and then you can almost hear an exhale. When I say hear exhale, I think that's coming from the family members of Charles Vallow who have been in the courtroom, some of who testified during this trial. And to give you some backstory here, Lori Vallow Daybell has already been convicted of killing her children, Tylee and JJ, in Idaho. She was also convicted in her role in the death of her current husband, Chad Daybell's first wife. So there's a huge backstory here. None of that came up in this case for the jury, but the people in the room, the people who are watching this, the media, the public, and the family members, they know this history and know what it means to be in this courtroom today and get another guilty verdict for Lori Vallow Daybell. And I want to point out two family members in particular. That would be Charles Vallow's sister, Kay Woodcock, and his brother, Jerry Vallow. And, you know, I can't imagine being in their shoes, having to go through trial after trial. 2 trials in Idaho, one for Lori Vallow, one for her husband, Chad Daybell. And now they're here 6 years after Charles Vallow was killed in Chandler. And you know, they said there was some relief. They said it feels good to get this guilty verdict, but of course it doesn't bring Charles back. This whole case has been disturbing with dead spouses, dead children, a whole conspiracy beyond this. So Lori Vallow Daybell could be with Chad Daybell. And, you know, there was dark religious beliefs at the core of this case. So it's really a lot to take in. And again, to finally get to this moment, I think was some justice for Charles Vallow's family. I was able to ask his siblings, you know, what would you say to Lori if you could talk to her right now? And here's how they responded.
We got you, and you're not the smartest person in the room, and now it's time for you just to hide away. And well, after Brandon's trial, but you can just hide away and everybody's going to forget about you. We'll be on our way through our life, and she'll be rotting in prison where she deserves to be.
Like Charles always used to say, love always wins.
You know, Kay also described the past several years like walking through the pits of hell. Again, it's hard to imagine what this family has gone through, losing so many family members and also having to have this day in court over and over again. I'll mention that Lori Vallow Daybell represented herself in this case. That's something we did not see in Idaho. And, you know, I think the reaction was mixed. Clearly, the jury did not buy what she was selling. And we saw different versions of her in the courtroom. We saw her getting tense when she was cross-examining people. We saw her kind of being more soft-spoken with a softer voice when the jury was in the room. We saw her almost be combative and argumentative with the judge. So it was truly a spectacle to see, and I think that's why there's so much attention here on this case. But again, we are at that guilty verdict, and you may have heard Kay Woodcock, again, Charles Vallow's sister, mention Brandon is next. She's referring to Brandon Boudreau, who is the alleged victim in another murder conspiracy case Lori Vallow Daybell is facing here in Arizona. That case is out of Gilbert, and she's set to go to trial in that case in just the next few weeks here. So certainly more to come, but certainly a day of victory and a day of justice for all the victims in this case so far. Mark, Caribe. Very nonchalant. And, you know, I use that word specifically because that's what we heard in the testimony here, that after Charles Vallow's death, Lori Vallow Daybell, according to investigators who took the stand to testify in this case, her behavior stood out because she was nonchalant after this horrible thing happened. And we heard in her closing remarks, again, she's representing herself, so she got a lot of face time with the jury here. She said that this was just a family tragedy, but clearly the jury did not buy that from her.
What about today? Did Lori have any family in the courtroom?
Not that I saw, Tram. And, you know, that doesn't mean they weren't watching or paying attention to this. We know that this is being broadcast on a bit of a delay, but broadcast nonetheless. And of course, there's a lot of tension on this matter. We did see her son come into the courtroom on various occasions listening to testimony. We know it's hard for him to do that. I mentioned before that he lost his siblings in this whole ordeal. He lost his father figure in this whole ordeal. And in a way, he lost his mother because she is, you know, she's serving life in prison in Idaho, regardless of the outcome of these cases here in Arizona. So it's a huge ripple effect to all the crimes here in this case. And, I want to point out too, something we maybe haven't touched on yet, is that a lot of this is really bizarre. There are dark religious beliefs at the core of all of this. We know that Lori Vallow Daybell referred to her husband as a zombie, someone who was possessed. So these were really extreme details that the jury had to work with here. And ultimately, I don't think anyone is surprised by this verdict. Compared to Idaho, I would say there are some similarities in the fact that I think everyone knew where this case was going. It wasn't a surprise that there were guilty verdicts. And, I remember it was another one of those hold your breath moments because she had a multitude of charges in Idaho. If I recall, I believe it was 7. We know there was conspiracy to commit murder charges, fraud charges, and it was guilty, guilty, guilty. It was almost reading down the list of the verdict there. So it took a bit longer to get through, and that case took a lot longer to get through. But, thinking about jurors here, we know that there was an alternate juror in that case in Idaho who actually sat in for most of the trial here. I think it's not just the people impacted directly by the case and their, surviving victims, surviving relatives, but this has a toll on the jury too. I know in this case, we had to see autopsy photos. There was a lot of evidence shown in court that might be disturbing to see. For the jurors in Idaho, they had to see autopsy photos of Lori Vallow Daybell's children, of Tammy Daybell, Chad Daybell's first wife, and that's really hard to stomach. And I want to say in Idaho, the jury was advised that they would be seeing some really hard things in this case. So this certainly takes a toll on everybody in the courtroom. And I think those are the similarities of this case. I will say there was definitely a crowd in Idaho. People were, eager to see this case come to justice because that was really the first time Lori Vallow Daybell was in a courtroom and was tried for the crimes that she was accused of committing. And in that case, the big difference for her was that she had a public defender and she didn't take the stand. The only time we really heard from her was at her sentencing, where she kind of went off on a bit of a tangent, and afterward the judge in that case said it was obvious that she was still deep down in a religious delusion. So, take with that what you will, but we saw a lot more of Lori Vallow Daybell here, and I think we saw a lot of different versions of her because we saw her kind of being sassy with the judge. We saw her, in some ways very tensely cross-examining the witnesses. We saw her being sweet to some of the witnesses, and we saw her almost change her voice and change her demeanor when she was discussing things in front of the jury. So I think those are all key takeaways here, and I would love to know from jurors as well what they thought of her demeanor, what they thought of her representing herself. And I know our reporter Bianca Bono has been working very hard to get some of that jury reaction, and we know we'll have some of that coming up shortly for you guys.
Erica, because you've covered her extensively from beginning to end, in your opinion, why did you think that she wanted to defend herself? Like you said, she had a criminal defense attorney when she was in Idaho, but why represent herself this time for this case?
Tram, I don't know. And I would love to ask her not just that question, but a multitude of questions if we can ever get an interview with her. We have put in a request in the past and she's denied it, but I think it would be really insightful to understand what led up to all this, especially because, again, there's so much damage and destruction along the way here. But what I can tell you is that in Idaho, her case was delayed significantly because of competency issues. She actually had to leave the jail facility where she was being held in Idaho and was treated at a state hospital there until she was competent enough to stand trial. And we were wondering if that would be an issue here, too, in Arizona. And initially, she had some public defenders, and they said we should check for competency, and she did not want to do that. So I think this was her trying to take control of her situation. Again, this is my insight. We haven't heard this from her directly, but I think that may be the case here. And what we saw is that it didn't really do her much good.
This was so emotional. This was a life. This was her brother, Charles.
Yes, and I would say that also shows how effective the prosecution was in this case, that when they put Kay Woodcock on the stand, the jury listened and it mattered what she said. Even though this horrible tragedy has occurred, they listened to her. So I think that's key. And Kay had mentioned too that, it's sometimes a sign if a jury looks at you when they come back with a verdict or looked at you on the way out. So it's unfortunately, a playbook that they learn because she's been through so many of these trials so far for the related charges in these cases. And, she's been through this before. It's unfortunately not her first rodeo. And just to show the interconnectedness of all of this, she said that the prosecutor in the Idaho cases texted her saying congratulations today. There's really this big web of people paying attention to what's going on here in Arizona now and who have been following this case for years and years and years. And Kay said that, they may have lost members of their family, but they gained a new one in all the supporters and all the love that they've received. And I want to show you, I hope it's in my pocket still. Again, it's been a bit busy out here today, but people are handing out these bracelets. It says justice for Tylee, JJ, Charles, and Tammy. These are the 4 victims who now have convictions in their cases right now. It's been, they say the wheels of justice turn slowly, but this has been several years in the works now, but I think they're ready to pass these out. As Lori Vallow Daybell sat in the courtroom and listened to a jury find her guilty, Charles Vallow's family and others in the courtroom let out a sigh of relief. A moment of truth for Lori Vallow Daybell.
Guilty.
A reckoning for Charles Vallow's family.
6 years of walking the pits of hell every day. I'm ready to move on. It's time.
A jury found Vallow Daybell guilty of conspiring with her brother to kill her former husband Charles Vallow back in 2019, all so she could take his money and be with her new husband, Chad Daybell. She's already been convicted in Idaho for murdering her children, Tylee and JJ, and her role in the death of Tammy Daybell, Chad Daybell's first wife. In this case, the prosecutor brought in almost 20 witnesses and showed the jury text messages, phone calls, and police video to make her case for a conspiracy. Vallow Daybell, who represented herself, claimed self-defense and didn't call any witnesses or present any evidence.
We got you, and you're not the smartest person in the room.
Charles's sister, Kay Woodcock, and brother, Jerry Vallow.
You can just hide away, and everybody's going to forget about you. We'll be on our way through our life, and she'll be rotting in prison where she deserves to be.
And like Charles always used to say, love always wins.
Kay Woodcock even taking the stand in this trial, facing off with Vallow Daybell in cross-examination.
Ms. Woodcock, did you see or hear or personally witness me conspire with Alex Cox to kill my husband, Charles Vallow?
No, but I saw a ton of evidence that did. She's an actress. She turns on this persona and goes with it, and then boom, she turns it off, and then there's the real her, whatever the real her is. You know that baby talk she does, that baby voice? Yep. She needs to lose that, man. I hope she grows up in prison and learns how to talk like a woman.
She's testified in Idaho, too, enduring trial after trial. Now, it's Charles Vallow's turn for justice.
And as a parting shot, they got the again.
Lori Vallow Daybell is facing another conspiracy to commit murder charge here in Arizona. That case is set to go to trial in the next couple of months. Once her cases in Arizona wrap up, she'll be extradited back to Idaho, where she will serve the rest of her life in prison.